Part of the rising of nationalism in Europe. In 1848, Frederick Soru, a French artist, prepared a series of four prints visualizing the history of a world made up of democratic and social republics, as he called them. The first print, in figure 1, of the series shows the people of Europe and America, men and women of all ages and social classes, marching in a long train and offering homage to the Statue of Liberty as they pass by it. As you would recall, artists of this time of the French Revolution personified liberty as a female figure. Here, you can recognize the torch of enlightenment she bears in one hand and the charter of the rights of man in the other hand. On the earth, in the foreground of the rights of man in the other hand. On the earth, in the foreground of the image, lie the shattered remains of the symbol of absolute institutions. In Sorio's utopian vision, the people of the world are grouped as distinct nations identified through their flags and national costume. Leading the procession, way past the Statue of Liberty as are United States and Switzerland, which by this time were already nation states. France, identified by the revolutionary tricolor, has just reached the statue. She is followed by the peoples of Germany bearing the black, red, and gold flag. Interestingly, at the time when Sorius created this image, the German people did not exist as a united nation. The flag they carry is an expression of liberal hopes in 1848 to unify the numerous German speaking principalities into a nation state under a democratic constitution. Following the German people are the people of Austria, the Kingdom of Tuscaloosa, uh, Lombardy, Poland, England, Ireland, Hungary, and Russia. From the heavens above, the Christ, saints, and angels gaze upon the sea. They have been used by the artists to symbolize fraternity among the nations of the world. This chapter will deal with many of the issues visualized by Soryu in Figure 1. During the 19th century, nationalism emerged as a force which brought by about sweeping changes in the political and mental world of Europe. The end result of these changes was the emergence of the nation state in place of multinational dynastic empires of Europe. The concept and practices of a modern state in which a centralized power exercises a sovereign control over a clearly defined territory had been developing over a long period of time in Europe. But a nation state was one of in which the majority of its citizens and not only its rulers came to develop a sense of common identity and shared history or descent. This commonness did not exist from time immemorial. It was forgot through struggles, through the actions of leaders and the common people. This chapter will look at the diverse process through which nation states and nationalism came into being in 19th century Europe. First topic, the French Revolution and the idea of the nation. The first clear expression of nationalism came with the French Revolution in 1789. The France, as you would remember, was a fully fledged territorial state in 1789 under the rule of an absolute monarch. The political constitution changes that came in the wake of French Revolution led to the transfer of sovereignty from the monarchy to a body of French citizens. The revolution proclaimed that it was people who would henceforth constitute the nation and shape its destiny. From the very beginning, The French revolutions introduced various measures of practices that could create a sense of collective identity amongst the French people. The idea of la patrie, the fatherland, and les citoyens, the citizen, emphasized the notion of a united community enjoying equal rights under a constitution. A new French flag, the tricolor, was chosen to replace the former royal standard. The Estate General was elected by the body of active citizens and renamed the National Assembly. New hymns were composed, oaths taken, and martyrs commemorated, are in the name of their nation. A centralized administrative system was put in place and it formulated uniform laws for all citizens. Within its territory, internal customs duties and dues were abolished, and a uniform system of weights and measures were adopted. Regional dialects were discouraged and French, as it was spoken and written in Paris, became the common language of the nation. The revolutionaries further declared that it was the mission and the destiny of the French nation to liberate the people of Europe from despotism. In other words, to help other people of Europe to become nations. When the news of events in France reached the different cities of Europe, students and other members and of educated middle class began setting up Jacobin clubs. Their activities and campaigns prepared the way for the French armies which moved into Holland, Belgium, Switzerland, and much of the Italy in 1790s. With the outbreak of revolutionary wars, the French armies began to carry the idea of nationalism abroad. Within the wide swath of territory that came under his control, Napoleon set up about introducing many of the reforms that he had already introduced in France. Through a return to monarchy, Napoleon had no doubt destroyed democracy in France. But in the administrative field, he had incorporated revolutionary principles in order to make the whole system more rational and efficient. The Civil Code, uh, deliberately saying Uniform Civil Code of 1804, usually known as the Napoleonic Code, did away with the old privileges based on birth, established equality before the law, and secured the right to property. This code was exported to the regions under French control in the Dutch Republic, in Switzerland, in Italy, and Germany. Napoleon simplified administrative divisions, abolished the feudal system, and freed peasants from serfdom and manorial dues. In the towns, two guild restrictions were removed. Force, I would say, transport and communication system were improved. Peasants, artisans, workers, and new businessmen enjoyed a newfound freedom. Businessmen and small scale producers of goods, in particular, began to realize that uniform laws standardized in particular began to realize that uniform laws standardized weights and measures and a common national currency would facilitate the movement and exchange of goods and capital from one region to another. However, in the areas conquered, the reactions of the local populations to the French rule were mixed. Initially, in many places such as Holland and Switzerland, as well as in certain cities like Brussels, Mainz, Milan, and Warsaw, the French armies were welcomed as harbingers of liberty. But the initial enthusiasm soon turned to hostility as it became too clearly that the new administrative arrangements did not go hand in hand with the political freedom, increased taxation, censorship, forced to conscription into the French armies required to conquer the rest of the Europe, all seemed to outweigh the advantages and administrative changes. Before getting into seconds, just take 10 seconds break. Second part, the making of nationalism in Europe. If you look at the map of mid and 18th century Europe, you will find that there is no nation state as we know them today. What we know today as Germany, Italy, and Switzerland were divided into kingdoms, duchies, and cantons who ruled had their autonomous territories. Eastern and Central Europe were under autocratic monarchies within the territory of which lived diverse peoples. They did not see themselves as sharing a collective identity or common culture. Often they even spoke different languages and belonged to different ethnic groups. The Empire that ruled over Austria-Hungary, for example, was a patchwork of many different regions and peoples. It included the Alpine regions, the Tyrol, Austria, and the Sudetenland, as we know, known as Bohemia, where the aristocracy was predominantly German speaking. It also included the Italian speaking provinces of Lombardy and Venetia. In Hungary, half of the population spoke Magyar, while the others half spoke variety of delegates. In Galicia, the aristocracy spoke Polish. Besides these three dominant groups, there were also lived within the boundaries of the empire a mass subject peasant peoples, Bohemians and Slovaks to north, Slovenes in Carniola, Croats, that means Croatians to the south, Romanians to the east, and Transylvania. Such differences did not easily promote a sense of political unity. The only tie binding these diverse groups together was a common alliance to empire. Now, how did nationalism and the idea of nation state emerge? The aristocracy and the new middle class. Socially and politically, a landed aristocracy was a dominant class on the continent. The members of this class were united by a common way of life that cut across this class were united by a common way of life that cut across regional divisions. They owned estates and countryside and also townhouses. They spoke the French for purposes of diplomacy, and in high society, their families were often connected by ties of marriage. This powerful aristocracy was, however, numerically a small group. The majority of the population was made of peasantry. To the west, the bulk of land was farmed by tenants and small owners, while in Eastern and Central Europe, the pattern of landholding was character, characterized by vast estates which were cultivated by serfs. In Western and parts of Central Europe, the growth of industrial production and trade meant the growth of towns and emergence of commercial classes whose existence was based on production for the market. Industrialization began in England in the second half of the 18th century. But in France and parts of the German states, it occurred only during the 19th century. In its wake, new social groups came into being, a working class population and middle class made up of industrialists, businessmen, professionals. In Central and Eastern Europe, these groups were smaller in number till late 19th century. It was among the educated liberal middle classes that ideas of national unity following the abolition of aristocratic privileges gained popularity. Now, what did liberal nationalism stand for? Ideas of national unity in early 19th century Europe were closely allied to the ideology of liberalism. This term liberalism derives from the Latin root liber, meaning free. From the For the middle classes, liberalism stood for freedom for the individual and equality of all before the law. Politically, it emphasized the concept of government by consent. Since the French Revolution, liberalism had stood for the end of autocracy and clerical privileges. A constitution and representative government through parliament. 19th century liberals also stressed the inviolability of private property. Yet, equality before the law did not necessarily stand for a universal suffrage. You will recall that in revolutionary France, which marked the first political experiment in liberal democracy, the right to vote and to get elected was granted exclusively to property owning men, known as active citizens. Men without property and old women were excluded from political rights and were known as passive citizens. Only for a brief period under the Jacobins did all adult males enjoy suffrage. However, the Napoleonic Code went back to limited suffrage and reduced women to the status of minor, subjected to the authority of fathers and husbands. Throughout the 19th century and the early 20th century, women and propertied men organized opposition movements demanding equal political rights. In economic sphere, liberalism stood for the freedom of markets and the abolition of state-imposed restrictions on the movement of goods and capitals. During the 19th century, this was a strong demand of the emerging middle classes. Let us take an example of the German speaking regions in the half of the 19th century. Napoleon's administrative measures had created out of countless small principalities a confederation of 39 states. Each of these possessed its own currency and weight and measures. A merchant traveling in 1833 from Hamburg to Nuremberg to sell his goods would have had to pass 11 custom barriers and pay a custom duty of about 5% of each of them. Duties were often levied accordingly to the weight or measurement of the goods. As each region had its own system of weights and measurement, this involved time consuming calculation. The measure of growth, for example, was the LE, which in each region stood for a different length. An LE of a textile material bought at Frankfurt would get you 54.7 centimeter of cloth. In Mainz, 55.1 centimeter. In Nuremberg, 65.6 centimeter. In Freiburg, 53.5 centimeter. Such conditions were viewed as obstacles to economic exchange and growth by the new commercial classes, who argued for the creation of the unified economic territory, allowing the unhindered movements of goods, people, and capital. In 1834, a customs union or sovereign was formed at the initiative of Prussia and joined by most of the German states. The Union abolished tariff barriers and reduced the number of currencies from over 30 to 2. The creation of a network or railway further simulated mobility. Harnessing economic interests, the national unification, a wave of economic nationalism, strengthened the wider nationalist sentiments growing at the time. New conservatism after 1850. Following the defeat Napoleon in 1815, European governments were driven by a spirit of conservatism. Conservatism means a political philosophy that stressed the importance of tradition, established institutions and customs, and preferred gradual development to quick change. Conservatives believe that established traditional institution of the state and society like the monarchy, the church, social hierarchies, property and family should be preserved. Most conservatives, however, did not propose a return to the society of pre-revolutionary days. Rather, they realized from the changes initiated by Napoleon that modernization could, in fact, strengthen traditional institutions like the monarchy. It could make state power more effective and strong. A modern army, an efficient bureaucracy, a dynamic economic of the abolition of feudalism and serfdom could strengthen the autocratic monarchies of Europe. In 1815, representatives of European powers, Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria, who had collectively defeated Napoleon, met at Vienna to draw up a settlement for Europe. The Congress was hosted by the Austrian Chancellor Duke Metternich. The delegates drew up the Treaty of Vienna of 1815 with the object of undoing most of the changes that had come about in Europe during the Napoleonic Wars. The Bourbon dynasty, which has been deposed during the French Revolution, was restored to power, and France lost territories it had annexed under Napoleon. A series of states were set up on the boundaries of France to prevent French expansion in future. Thus, the Kingdom of Netherlands, which included Belgium, was set up in north of Genoa, was added to Piedmont in south. Prussia was given important new territories on the western frontiers, while Austria was given control of northern Italy. But the German Confederation of 39 states that had been set up by Napoleon was left untouched. In the east, Russia was given part of Poland while Prussia was given a portion of Saxony. The main intention was to restore the monarchies that had been overthrown by the Napoleon and create a new conservative order in Europe. Conservative regimes set up in 1815 were autocratic. They did not tolerate criticism and dissent and sought to curb activities that questioned the legitimacy of autocratic governments. Most of them imposed censorship laws to control what was said in newspapers, books, plays, and songs and reflected ideas of liberty and freedom. Associated with the French Revolution, the memory of French Revolution nonetheless uh, continued to inspire liberals. One of the major issues taken by the liberal nationalists who criticized the new conservative order was freedom of the press. The revolutionaries. During the years following 1815, The fears of repression drove many liberal nationalists underground secret societies sprang up in many European states to train revolutionaries and spread their ideas. To be revolutionary at this time meant a commitment to oppose monarchical forms that had been established after the Vienna Congress and the fight for the liberty and freedom. Most of these revolutionary also saw the creation of nation states as necessary part of the struggle for freedom. Once such individual was Italian revolutionary Giuseppe Mazzini, born in Genoa in 1807. He became a member of the secret society of Carbonari as a young man of 24. He was sent into exile in 1831 for attending a revolution in Liguria. He subsequently founded two more underground societies, first Young Italy in Marseilles and then Young Europe in Bern, whose members were like-minded young men from Poland, France, Italy, and the German states. Mazzini believed that God had intended nations to be natural units of mankind. So, Italy could not continue to be the patchwork of small states and kingdoms. It had to be formed into a small unified republic within a wider alliance of nations. This unification alone could be the basis of Italian liberty. Follow his model, secret societies were set up in Germany, France, Switzerland, and Poland. Mazzini's relentless opposition to the monarchy and his vision to democratic republics frightened the conservatives. Metternich described him as the most dangerous enemy of our social order. You can see Giuseppe Mazzini here. Before going the third, just take just a small break. Third, the age of revolutions, 1830 to 1848. And as conservative regimes tried to consolidate their power, liberalism and nationalism came to increasingly associated with revolution. In many regions of Europe, such as Italian German states, the provinces of the Ottoman Empire, Ireland, and Poland, these revolutions were led by the liberal nationalists belonging to the educated middle class, elite among whom were professors, school teachers, clerks, and members of the commercial middle classes. The first upheaval took place in France in July 1830. The Bourbon kings, who had been restored to power during the conservative reaction after 1850, were now overthrown by liberal revolution, who installed a constitution monarchy with Louis Philippe at its head. When France sneezes, the Metternich once remarked, the rest of the Europe catches cold. The July Revolution sparked an uprising in Brussels, which led to Belgium breaking away from the United Kingdom of the Netherlands. An event that mobilized nationalist feelings amongst the educated elite across Europe was the Greek War of Independence. Greece had been part of the Ottoman Empire since the 15th century. The growth of revolution nationalism in Europe part of a struggle for independence amongst the Greeks which began in 1821, nationals in Greece got support from other Greeks living in exile, and also from many poets and artists lauded Greece as the cradle of European civilization and mobilized public opinions to support its struggle against a Muslim empire. The English poet Byron organized funds and later went to fight in the war, where he died of fever in 1824. Finally, the Treaty of Constantinople of 1832 recognized Greece as an independent nation. The romantic imagination and national faith. The development of nationalism did not come about only through wars and territorial expansion. Culture played an important role in creating the idea of nation. Art and poetry, stories and music helped express and shape nationalist feeling. Let us look at Romanticism, a culture movement which sought to develop a particular form of national sentiment. Romantic artists and poets generally criticize the glorification of reasons and science and focus instead on emotions, intuition, and mystical feelings. This effort was to create a sense of shared collective heritage, a common cultural past as basis of a nation. Other romantics, such as German philosopher Johann Gottfried Herder from 1744 to 1803, claimed that true German culture was to be discovered among the common people. Das Volk. Common people were known as Das Volk. It was through folk songs, folk poetry, and folk dances that the true spirit of the nations were known as Volksgeist, was popularized. No collecting and recording these forms of folk culture was essential to the project of nation building. The emphasis of vernacular languages and the collective of local folklore was not just to recover an ancient nation's national spirit, but also to carry the modern nationalist message to large audiences who were mostly illiterate. This was especially so in the case of Poland, which had been partitioned at the end of the 18th century by the great powers Russia, Prussia, and Austria. Even though Poland no longer existed as an independent territory, national feelings were kept alive through music and language. Karol Kurpinski, for an example, celebrated the national struggle through his operas and music, turning folk dances like the Polonaise and Masuka into nationalist symbols. Language too played an important role in developing national sentiments. After Russian occupation, the Polish language was forced out of schools and Russian language was imposed everywhere. In 1831, an armed rebellion against Russian rule took place, which was ultimately crushed. Following this, many members of the clergy in Poland began to use language as a weapon of national resistance. Polish was used to church gatherings and all religious instructions. As a result, a large number of priests and bishops were put in jail or sent to Siberia by the Russian authorities as punishment for their refusal to preach in Russia. The use of Polish came to be seen as a symbol of struggle against Russian dominance. Hunger, hardship, and popular revolt. 1830s were years of great economic hardship in Europe. The first half of the 19th century saw an enormous increase in population all over Europe. In most countries, there were more seekers of job than employment. Population from rural areas migrated to the cities to live in overcrowded slums. Small producers in towns were often faced with stiff competition from imports of cheap machine-made goods from England, where industrialization was more advanced than on continent. This was especially so in textile production. This was carried out mainly in homes or small workshops and was only partly mechanized. In whose regions of the Europe where aristocracy still enjoyed power, peasants struggled under the burden of feudal dues and obligations. The rise of food prices of or a year of bad harvest led to widespread pauperism in town and country. The year 1848 was one such year. Food shortages and widespread unemployment brought the population of Paris out on roads. Barricades were erected and Louis Philippe was forced to flee. National Assembly proclaimed a republic, granted suffrage to all adult males over above 21 and guaranteed the right to work. National workshops to provide employment were set up. Earlier in 1845, weavers in Silesia had led a revolt against contractors who supplied them raw material and gave them orders for finished textiles but drastically reduced their payments. Journalist uh, Wilhelm Wolff described the events in the Silesian village as follows. In these villages, within 8,000 inhabitants, cotton weaving is the most widespread occupation. The misery of the workers is extreme. The desperate need for jobs has been taken advantage of by the contractors to reduce the price of goods they order. On 4th June at 2 p.m., a large crowd of weavers emerged from their homes and marched in pairs of mansion of their contractor, demanding higher wages. They were treated with scorn and threats alternately. Following this, group of them forced their way into the house, smashed its elegant window panes, furniture, uh, porcelain. Another group broke into the storehouse and plundered it of supplies of cloth into their tore to shreds. The contractor fled with his family to a neighboring village, which, however, refused to shelter such a person. He returned 24 hours later, having requestioned the army. In the exchange that followed, 11 weavers were shot. The revolution of the liberals. Parallel to the revolts of the poor, unemployed and starving peasants and workers in many European countries in the year 1848, a revolution led by the educated middle class was underway. Events of February 1848 in France had brought about the abdication of monarch and a republic based on universal male suffrage had been proclaimed. In other parts of Europe where independent nation states did not yet exist, such as Germany, Italy, Poland, Austria-Hungarian Empire, men and women of the liberal middle class combined their demands for constitutionalism with the national unification. They took advantage of the growing popular unrest to push their demands for the creation of nation state. In the German regions, a large number of political associations whose members were middle class professionals, businessmen, and prosperous artisans came together in the city of Frankfurt and decided to vote for an old German national assembly. On 18th May 1848, 831 elected representatives marched in a festive procession to take their places in the Frankfurt Parliament, convened in the Church of St. Paul. They drafted a constitution for a German nation to be headed by a monarchy subject to a parliament. When the deputies offered the crown on these terms to Frederick Wilhelm IV, King of Prussia, he rejected it and joined other monarchies to oppose the elected assembly. While the opposition of the aristocracy and military became stronger, the social basis of parliament crowd eroded. The parliament was dominated by the middle classes who resisted the demands workers and artisans of and consequently lost their support. In the end, troops were called in and the assembly was forced to disband. The issue, the extending social rights to women, was a controversial one with the liberal movement, in which large number of women had participated actively over the years. Women had formed their political association, founded newspapers, and taken part in political meetings and demonstrations. Despite this, they were denied suffrage rights during the election of the assembly. When the Frankfurt Parliament convened in the Church of St. Paul, women were admitted only as observers to stand in visitors' gallery. Thought conservatives forces uh, as forces were able to suppress liberal movements in 1848. They could not restore the old order. Monarchs were beginning to realize that the cycles of revolution and repression could only be ending by granting concessions to the liberal nationalist revolutionaries. Hence, in the years after 1848, the autocratic monarchies of Central and Eastern Europe began to introduce the changes that had already taken place in Western Europe before 1850. Thus, serfdom and bonded labor were abolished both in the Habsburg domination and in Russia. The Habsburg rulers granted more autonomy to the Hungarians in 1867. Fourth, the making of Germany and Italy. Germany. Can the army be architect of a nation? After 1848, the nationalism in Europe moved away from the association with the democracy and revolution. Nationalist sentiments were often mobilized by conservatives by promoting state power with achieving political domination over Europe. This can observed in the process by which Germany and Italy came to be unified as nation states. As you have seen, nationalist feeling were widespread among middle classes. German who in 1848 tried to unite the different regions of the German Confederation into a nation governed by elected parliament. This liberal initiative to nation building was, however, repressed by combined forces of the monarchy and the military, supported by the large landowners called Junkers of Prussia. From then on, Prussia took on the leadership of the movement for national unification. Its chief minister, Otto von Bismarck, was architect of its process carried out with the help of Prussian army and bureaucracy. Three wars over 7 years with Austria, Denmark, and France ended in Prussia his victory and completed the process of unification. In January 1871, the Prussian King William I was proclaimed German Emperor in ceremony held at Versailles. On the bitterly cold morning of 18th January 1871, an assembly comprising the princes of the German states, representatives of the army, important Prussian ministers, including the chief minister Otto and Bismarck, gathered in the unheated hall of mirrors in the palace of Versailles or to proclaim the new German Empire headed by Kaiser William I of Prussia. The nation building process in Germany had demonstrated the dominance of Prussian state power. The new state placed a strong emphasis on modernizing the currency, banking, legal, and judicial system in Germany. Prussian measures and practices often became a model of the rest of the Germany. Italy unified. Like Germany, Italy too have long history of political fragmentation. Italians were scattered over several dynastic states as well as the multinational Habsburg Empire. During the middle of the 19th century, Italy was divided into seven states, of which only one, Sardinia Piedmont, was ruled by Italian princely house. The north was under Austrian Habsburgs, the center was ruled by the Pope, and the southern regions were under the domination of the Bourbon kings of Spain. Even the Italian languages had acquired one common form and still had many regional and local variations. During the 1830s, Giuseppe Mazzini had sought to put together a coherent program for an initial Italian republic. He had also formed a secret society called Young Italy for the dissemination of his goals. The failure of revolutionary uprising both in 1831 and 1848 meant that Mandil now fell on Sardinia Piedmont under its ruler King Victor Emmanuel II to unify the Italian states through war in the eyes of the ruling cities, ruling elites of this region. A unified Italy offered them the possibility of economic development and political dominance. Chief Minister Cavour, who led the movement to unify regions of Italy, was neither a revolutionary nor a democrat. Like many other wealthy and educated members of the Italian elite, he spoke French much better than he did Italian. Through a tactful diplomatic alliance with France, engineered by Cavour, Sardinia Piedmont success in defeating the Austrian forces in 1859. Apart from regular troops, a large number of armed volunteers under the leadership of Garibaldi, not Giuseppe Mazzini, joined the fray. In 1860, the march into South Italy and Kingdom of Two Sicilies and success in winning the support of local peasants in order to drive out the Spanish rulers. In 1861, Victor Emmanuel II was proclaimed King of United Italy. However, much of the Italian population, among whom rates of illiteracy was very high, remained blissfully unaware of liberal nationalist ideology. The peasant masses uh, had supported Garibaldi in southern Italy had never heard of Italia and believed that L'Italia was in Victor Emmanuel's voice. Strange case of Britain. Strange case of Britain. The model of nation or nation state, some scholars have argued, is Great Britain. In Britain, the formation of the nation state was not the result of sudden upheaval or revolution. It was the result of a long drawn out process. There was British nation prior to the 18th century. The primary identities of the people who inhabited the British Isles were ethnic ones, such as English, Welsh, Scot, or Irish. All of these ethnic groups had their own culture and political traditions. But as the English nation steadily grew in wealth, importance, and power, it was able to extend its influence over the other nations of the islands. The English Parliament, which had seized power from the monarchy in 1688 at the end of the protracted conflict, was the instrument through which a nation state with England at the center came to be formed. The Act of Union 1707 between England and Scotland that resulted in formation of United Kingdom of Great Britain meant in effect that England was able to impose its influence on Scotland. British Parliament was henceforth dominated by the English members. The growth of the British identity, meaning the Scotland distinctive culture and political institutions, were systematically suppressed. The Catholic clans that inhabited the Scottish Highlands suffered terrible repression whenever they attempted to assert their independence. The Scottish Highlanders were forbidden to speak their Gaelic language or wear their national dress, and large were forcibly driven out of their homeland. Ireland suffered similar fate. It was a country deeply divided into Catholics and Protestants. The English helped the Protestants of Ireland to establish their dominance over the largely Catholic countries. Catholic revolt against British dominance were suppressed after a failed revolt by a Wolfe Tone and his United Irishmen in 1798. Ireland was forcibly incorporated in the United Kingdom in 1801. A new British nation was forged through the propagation of a dominant English culture. The symbols of New Britain, the British flag, Union Jack, and national anthem, God Save Our Noble King, the national language were actively promoted, and the older nations survived only as subordinate partners in this union. Visualizing the nation, fifth point. Why it is easy enough to represent a ruler, though a portrait or a statue. How does one go about giving a face to a nation? Artists in 18th and 19th centuries found a way out by personifying a nation. In other words, they represented a country as if it were a person. Nations were then portrayed as female figures. A female form that was chosen to personify the nation did not stand for any particular woman in real life. Rather, it sought to give the abstract idea of the nation a concrete form. That is, the female figure became an allegory of the nation. We will recall during the French Revolution, artists used to female allegory to portray ideas such as liberty, justice, and republic. These ideas were represented through uh, specific objects or symbols. As you remember, the attributes of liberty and the red cap and or the broken chain, while justice is generally blindfolded women carrying pair of weight scales. You may remember the starting of the video, starting of the chapter, we were getting one picture. In that also, one liberty was being what shown by symbol as a woman. Similar female allegories were invented by artists in 19th century to represent the nation. In France, she was Christian Marianne, a popular Christian name which underlined the idea of people's nation. Her characteristics were driven from those of liberty and republic. The red cap, the tricolor, the cockade, statues of Marianne were erected in public squares to remind the public of national symbol of unity, and to persuade them to identify that with it. We identify with it. Marianne images were marked on coins and stamps. Similarly, Germania became the allegory of German nation. In the visual representation, Germania wears a crown of oak leaves as the German oak stands for heroes. This is Germania and this is Marianne. Nationalism and imperialism. By the last quarter of the 19th century, nationalism no longer retained its idealistic liberal democratic sentiment of the first half of the century, but became a narrow creed with a limited ends. During this period, nationalist groups became increasingly intolerant of each other and every day to go to war. Major European powers in turn manipulated the nationalist aspirations of the subject people in Europe to further their own imperial aims. The most serious source of nationalist tension in the Europe after 1871 was the area called the Balkans. The Balkans was a region of geographical and ethnic variations comprising modern day Romania, Bulgaria, Albania, Greece, Ukraine, Croatia, Bosnia Herzegovina, Slovenia, Serbia, and Montenegro, whose inhabitants were broadly known as Tsars. A large part of Balkans was under the control of Ottoman Empire. The spread of ideas of romantic nationalism in the Balkans together with the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire made this region very explosive. All, all through the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire had sought to strengthen itself through modernization and internal reforms but with very little success. One by one, its its European subject nationalities broke away from the control and declared independence. The Balkan people based their claims for independence or political rights on nationality and used history to prove that they had once been independent but had subsequently been subjugated by foreign powers. Hence, the rebellious nationality in the Balkans thought of their struggles as attempts to win back their long lost independence. As the different Slavic nationalists struggled to define their identity and independence, the Balkan area became an area of intense conflict. The Balkan states were fiercely jealous of each other and each hoped to gain more territory at the expense of two others. Matters were further complicated because of the Balkans also became the scene of high power rivalry. During this period, there were intense rivalry among the European powers over trade and colonies as well as naval and military might. These rivalries were very evident in the way the Balkan problem unfolded. Each power, Russia, Germany, England, Austro-Hungary, was keen on countering the hold of other powers over the Balkans and extending its own control over the area. This led to a series of wars in the region and finally the First World War. Nationalism, allaying the imperialism, led Europe to disaster in 1940. But meanwhile, many countries in the world which had been colonized, the European powers in the 19th century began to oppose imperial domination. The anti-imperial movements that developed everywhere were nationalist, in the sense that they all struggled to form the independent nation states and were inspired by a sense of collective national unity. Forget in confrontation with imperial, the European ideas of nationalism were nowhere replicated, for people everywhere developed their own specific variety of nationalism. But this idea that societies would be organized in nation state came to accept it as natural and universal. That's all. You can hold this, and I'll make it in one bag. Just hold the video, and you can just check on those questions. If you can answer, please answer. Thank you for watching the video. Please subscribe the channel, like the video. If you want, share this to your friends. Thank you. And